Well, in this session, we're looking at what would God say to FDR. This year I saw a terrifying movie, and it was called IOUSA, the movie. You can watch it online for free. David Walker, who is the chief comptroller of the United States, quite frankly, I didn't know we had one. He keeps the books. He was appointed by President Clinton, worked for Clinton for both his terms, and then worked for George Bush. And during that time, he said, the politicians in Washington are lying to you. Politics. I looked up politics one time. I think it comes from poly, meaning many, ticks, meaning blood-sucking. He said, that's what they're doing. The politics on both sides of the aisle are just borrow, spend. Somebody later will take care of it. And he got together and said, I couldn't get either side of the aisle to stop spending. So he started a foundation. And he said, I want you to see that even seemingly good programs like Social Security has pushed a wave of debt and enslavement on our children and grandchildren. As Americans, libertarians, Democrats, and Republicans, we have got to come together and look at the truth. And the truth is, we're in big trouble. We have spent and promised far more than we can pay for. And it all traces back, in this session, to FDR. What are some of the seemingly compassionate good things he did that have us and our children and grandchildren in deep trouble? Why do we do this? Remember, in the last session, we talked about looking inward. I heard a story about a lawyer. He had just bought a brand new Jaguar and wanted to show it off to his friends. He parked it right there at the edge of the courthouse. They came down after a case, and he said, guys, look at this. He came around to the outside, he opened the door, and all of a sudden a truck came by and completely destroyed the door, took it about a block down the street, and he is furious. He can't believe this guy just destroyed his brand new car, his friends, he's embarrassed, he's angry. Police come by, and he's ranting and raving about this ridiculous truck driver. And as he gets done with this rant, the police officer says, buddy, you are so materialistic. You are so worried and so concerned about your car door, you didn't notice that your left arm is missing. And the lawyer looks down. Now he's even more mad. He's like, oh, I can't believe it. The guy took the door off my car, plus he took my Rolex. Well, what's going on there? Something's wrong. When you're more concerned about your car and your watch than you are about your real body, something's going on. And this is how lies, spiritual lies, economic lies, impact us and drive us to insanity, to do dumb things. Godonomics is about producing, profiting, saving, and from our savings, real money, we make decisions on what we spend, on what we invest in, and what we give. Consumeronomics, or Keynesian economics, which is what FDR practiced, was about, well, even if you haven't saved enough, let's go ahead and consume more than we have. We'll just borrow. We'll borrow from future generations. We're going to tax producers, not just today's producers. We're going to tax tomorrow's producers, the children of tomorrow, the grandchildren of tomorrow. They won't mind. They're not here to vote yet. So what we do is we're going to borrow from future generations. This is what FDR did. Quite frankly, it's just about what every politician has done over the last 50 years. What would God say to FDR? What would he say to Clinton? What would he say to Barack Obama? What would he say to George Bush? Stop spending tomorrow's money today. Stop spending tomorrow's money today. It's foolish. You're enslaving yourself, and you are stealing from future generations. Why would we do that? Why would we spend tomorrow's money today? Why would we not participate in what God says is his promise that we can have liberty, prosperity, and generosity? Why? Well, it's because we've made two exchanges. And if we want to experience the liberty God has for us, the prosperity he has for us, and the generosity, we need to not exchange borrowing for budgeting and don't exchange liberty for security. Let's begin by talking about borrowing versus budgeting. The Bible says in Proverbs 21:20, there is a desirable treasure. There is even oil in the dwelling of the wise, but the foolish man squanders it. If you go to a wise man's home, you're going to find he has actual treasure and actual oil savings in his account. He produced, he profited, and he saved. He held back some of today's money to invest in tomorrow. He didn't consume it all. The foolish man does the opposite. He consumes all of today's money. Sometimes the foolish man even consumes some of tomorrow's money. But the wise man says, I want to take back or keep back some of today's profits so that I can invest in tomorrow. Number one, I want to give to the needy and the poor. I want to find some ways to invest in ventures that are going to help the needy. I want to be radically generous. Number two, I want to save back some of today's money so that I can invest in future ventures, future jobs, future expansions. I want to find ways to bless others by having the capital available to do that. And I'd like to spend. I'd like to save my money in such a way that when I can afford it, I want to buy the nicer car, the nicer house. When I can afford it. When I have enough of today's money to be ready for that. That's what the good man does. That's what the wise man does. The foolish man does the opposite. He squanders it. He consumes it all. In fact, another proverb says this, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Well, think about that. The good man produces and profits in such a way that he makes such an incredible amount of money, incredible amount of savings, that he can give to his family's children and grandchildren. Now, does this sound like the Bible's saying money and profit is bad? No, it's saying you can be a blessing to future generations, the poor, future family members, by keeping an inheritance for your children's children. Now contrast that with Keynesian economics that FDR practiced. Not only is it foolish to spend today's money today, consume it all, it's foolish to consume or use tomorrow's money today, but it is immoral to steal from your children and grandchildren and use their money and spend it today. Only Keynesian economics would find a way to steal from people who aren't born yet. The Bible says the good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Keynesian economics says go ahead and borrow and steal from your children's children. And yet FDR picked this up and said, hey, we're in a crisis. We're in trouble. And while we're in trouble, how do you get out of a crisis? Well, we learned from John Keynes, you spend or borrow your way out of it. And maybe you didn't grow up hearing this, and this might sound like crazy talk, and I'd encourage you to look at the facts. Here's what I grew up hearing in school. We were in trouble. We had a depression. The depression was really bad. FDR came in, and he spent a bunch of money we didn't have. He borrowed from the future. The fancy word is deficit spending. What is deficit spending? Spending tomorrow's money today. So FDR said, hey, we're going to start these programs. We'll just borrow or tax the producers, and we'll tax the future generations for Social Security and these other programs. And I learned in school, things were bad. FDR put this program in place. Things were good. But then I started saying, that just doesn't seem like it would be common sense. That didn't work in my own life. Why would that work? So I began to look at the facts. Because I had heard capitalism was going on, capitalism was bad, FDR came in, added some socialism, and it saved the day. That's not what happened at all. In fact, I'll put this graph up on the screen. Here's what happened. Herbert Hoover was not a free market capitalist. In fact, he, in the first 4 years, he actually increased deficit spending by 47%. 47% in 4 years. If you look at the graph, you can see what happens. The Dow Jones slides down. He said, let's just keep borrowing and keep spending, and it just kept going down. Insane thinking is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting another result. Year 2, let's keep spending. It worked so well the first year. Year 3, let's do it again. Do it again. And by the end of his presidency, he had increased deficit spending, tomorrow's money spent today, by 47%. So FDR comes in. He says, hey, that worked so well for Hoover. Why don't I try it? So he institutes the New Deal. And the first New Deal, he borrows a bunch of money to start a bunch of programs. And if you look at the Dow Jones, you see it went up. There was a sugar high. There was an initial boost. Now, it didn't get nearly as high as it was before. And then he said, this works so well, let's do a second deal. And the second New Deal finally broke the system. You know, you can stick stuff on a credit card and buy stuff, and it will work for a time. But ultimately, we don't break God's laws, we discover them. You don't break the law of gravity, you discover it. You don't break God's law that you shouldn't spend tomorrow's money today. You discover, I'm enslaved. I'm in trouble. The second New Deal gets put in, and look what happens. We actually had a depression within our depression. If you go to other countries, they'll talk about the depression. America, we call it the Great Depression. Why? Because the Dow Jones fell 50% within the depression because of the excessive spending of tomorrow's money today. The second New Deal, if you look at the chart there, 50% drop, and it stays there. It stays there. In fact, from the peak of the Dow Jones to the time it recovered, 25 years. How did we get out of it? World War II. We started producing again. We started producing actual products, profited from it, and that's what brought us out of the hole we were in. You say, Chad, where are you getting this stuff? Again, you can look it up. In Emily Shale's book, The Forgotten Man, in 800 pages, she spells out exactly what happens, fact after fact after fact, to show that borrowing, deficit spending, spending your way out of a crisis, it didn't work then. As much as we want to have a revisionist history, it didn't work. Only production got us out of the Great Depression. Maybe the objection is, Chad, whoa. That's not true. In fact, we've recently been spending money we don't have, and look, the Dow Jones is back up to 10,000. You're wrong. Remember the sugar high in the chart? There is an initial surge because you have all this money suddenly available, but you got to pay it back at some point. So even though you get the sugar high, you've enslaved yourself. You will come crashing down. It is not a true recovery. It's like, imagine you have a next door neighbor, and he's pretended to be rich. He's got a nice house he can't afford. It was on a variable interest rate. It's now coming due. It's ballooned. He's like, wow, I didn't really think tomorrow would really come. It actually has come. And you know he's about to be foreclosed on. So he's got a car he can't afford. He's got a house about to be foreclosed on. And you're thinking, man, I really feel bad about my neighbor. My neighbor's in trouble. And you're praying for him, and you're asking if you can help in any way. And you look out the window, and you see your next door neighbor is all smiles. He drives into his front door in his driveway, and he's got a brand new car. And you're thinking, wow, he must have got a new job. And then you see, he brings out the back of the car a brand new plasma screen. And he brings in the front door. You're saying, happy days are here again. He must have recovered. He must be producing again. He must have a great new job. But no. What you find out is that he just got another $8,000 limit credit card. He just found another source to borrow from. Did he pay back the principal of the first cards? No. He just has a new idiot who's willing to lend to him, despite his bad practices. This is what's happened in governments. Governments continue to spend money they don't have. And you say, well, I guess we got a recovery. No. We just found a way to enslave more people, tax more people, or inflate the currency. It's not a true recovery, just like with your friend or your neighbor across the street. And this is what FDR attempted. And if we're going to avoid this exchange, not exchanging borrowing for budgeting, see, nobody wants to budget. Budgeting is saying, I need to make sure that what I have coming in is more than what I have going out. Oh, I don't want to do that. I deserve more than that. I deserve more than I actually have made. We got to ask ourselves, why am I doing that? Why am I spending tomorrow's money today? What is it in me that does that? Well, Jesus says, I'll tell you exactly why. In Luke 12, he said, take heed and beware of covetousness. Why? Because your life does not consist of the abundance of the things you possess. What? He who dies with the most toys doesn't really win? Jesus says no. Beware. The thing that's driving you, the thing that drove governments and FDR, that drives you and I, is covetousness. We want somebody else's stuff, somebody else's things. And the driving force for that covetousness is thinking that my life is built on the abundance of the things I possess. Watch out for it. Take heed. Be careful. And the reason he says take heed and be careful is because greed and covetousness come in so many forms that you've got to say, I want a vision for my money. Budget sounds like, oh, budget, I'm going to be restrained and held back. You know what budget is? It's a vision. I love the prophet Habakkuk said, write the vision. Make it plain on tablets that he who runs, when he reads it. When you read this budget, you can say, I want to make my money go to the vision. That's what a budget is. Here are my priorities. I'd like some margin in my life. I'd like to be able to give financially to my church or to the needy. I'd like to be able to invest in some things for the future. This is a budget. Everyone has a budget. You may not have written yours down. You have some way in which you're telling your money what to do. You say, no, I don't. You say, yeah. Well, right now I'm in so much debt. Well, that's your budget. That's your vision. So write down what your current budget is and ask yourself, do I want that to be my priorities? So, well, yeah, I'd like to be able to be generous. I'd like to save more, but I can't. Write the vision down. You're never going to exchange borrowing for budgeting until you have a vision and decide what you're going to do. In fact, I love how R.C. Sproul Jr. says it in his book, Biblical Economics. How do you find freedom if you're enslaved? How do you get out of the mess you're in? It's simple enough. You don't follow the path to poverty, consuming more than you produce, Keynesian economics. Instead, we follow the path to prosperity. You produce more than you consume. And I love this quote, don't sell tomorrow's labor for today's consumption. Don't sell tomorrow's labor for today's consumption. That's what spending tomorrow's money today does. You're saying the labor I'm going to do tomorrow, I'm using today. And many people have credit cards, and those credit cards, you're still paying for things that you sold at a garage sale years ago. You got a whole attic and a whole basement full of just junk that you're not even using anymore, but you're still paying for it because you borrowed from tomorrow's labor. Why do we do this? Well, am I planning for tomorrow's problems? See, some of us come into society, and Jesus said, in this world you're going to have trouble. There's going to be hardship. And part of borrowing is saying, I need some savings and margin because life's going to kick you in the teeth sometimes. In fact, I just had, over the last month, meetings with folks in our church, and this recession has really hurt a lot of people. One guy lost his job. He's been in the same career, same job in manufacturing for over 30 years. And now he doesn't know what to do. Can't find a job. He hasn't had to do a resume in 50 years because he's always had the same career in the same company. And now he's like, what do I do? I didn't plan for this. I don't have any savings. I wasn't ready for this. I just didn't think this would ever happen. I had another guy who said, family problems. I have this family intervention that happened, and what's going on in my family, I had some savings, but I never imagined something this difficult would come my way. Even though you don't like the promises from the Bible that say evil days will come. You don't like those things when Jesus says, in this world you're going to have tribulation. I like the optimistic, I hope it's all going to work well, but it doesn't always work well. And so part of being wise is realizing that the days are evil, and life will come sometimes and kick you in the teeth. My wife and I had one of those recently. We adopted my son Quinn over the last year, and he was born back in June, and we just love him. How God worked the whole story, and we were there. I was there 5 minutes after he was born, and we took him home. But about 2 months ago, my wife said, hey, I'm taking Quinn to the doctor. I think there's a concern. And it was one of those days that just kicks you and hits you right in the teeth. I came home. My daughter had just got the swine flu, and I was putting her in the room and trying to get her comfortable. I walked out and said, honey, what's going on with Quinn? Is it serious? She says, it's really serious. You need to sit down. So I went from speed mode to what's going on. She said, we found out that our son has an incurable eye condition, that he's going to be blind. And I'd noticed that his eyes were moving back and forth and there was some issue, but there's nothing that prepares you to see the word incurable next to your son, a daughter, a family member's name. My wife and I have spent our life trying to give to other people and save, but how do you save for that? And here we were investing in somebody else, investing in somebody who was going to be placed in an unhealthy place, and it's just like life kicked us in the teeth. And I remember praying that night and saying, God, I don't know if I'm up to the task. Besides the financial piece, I don't know if I'm emotionally up to the task. Am I going to have what it takes? And that night, through tears and many prayers, I sat down with the scripture and I read this verse where it said, God has manifold grace for the manifold trials of our life. And I thought, well, this is a manifold trial. I mean, this is a huge trial. This is a big trial. And I don't know if my wife and I are ready for this trial. But God, if there really are different sized trials, this seems like a big one. I'm trusting you for that big size grace to come and give me the strength, the comfort, and the leadership I need to lead through the circumstance. You see, God wants to give us wisdom to prepare for the reality that evil days come. The writer of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes isn't the most upbeat book, but he's so truthful about reality. And he says, prepare for difficult times. Here's how he says it. He says, give a serving to 7, or also to 8, for you do not know what evil will come upon the earth. So he says, evil will come upon the earth, and you don't know where it's going to come from. So when you think about your savings, diversify. Put it in 7 or 8 different places. You say, well, I had all mine in real estate, and I got clobbered. Well, I had all mine in gold, I got clobbered. I had all mine in stocks, I got clobbered. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, diversify to 7 or 8 different places, because you don't know how evil is going to strike you. James picks up this idea, and referring to business in Proverbs. He says, come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we're going to go to such and such a place, spend a year there, buy, sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. What he's saying is when you presume upon tomorrow's income, you don't know what's going to happen. When you spend or count on tomorrow's income and spend it today, you're presuming you're always going to have that job. You're presuming the house is always going to go up. You can't always presume that because days are evil. Life will come at you fast, as the commercial says, but sometimes it'll come at you hard in a piercing way. Don't exchange borrowing for budgeting. I don't think I've ever been inspired by a political speech, but I saw one recently that really inspired me. It's over in England, and who knows what their politics are about over there. I don't, but it's a great speech. Daniel Hannan shows up, and he turns to the Prime Minister Brown, and he says exactly what God's saying to us. I think exactly what God would say to FDR. Stop spending tomorrow's money today. You're enslaving our children and grandchildren. It's making no sense, and you keep on keeping on. This speech is so great. You got to watch it. Daniel Hannan addressing Prime Minister Brown.
Prime Minister, I see you've already mastered the essential craft of the European politician, namely the ability to say one thing in this chamber and a very different thing to your home electorate. You've spoken here about free trade and amen to that. Who would have guessed, listening to you just now, that you were the author of the phrase British jobs for British workers, and that you have subsidised, where you have not nationalised outright, swathes of our economy, including the car industry and many of the banks? Perhaps you would have more moral authority in this House if your actions matched your words. Perhaps you would have more legitimacy in the councils of the world if the United Kingdom were not going into this recession in the worst condition of any G20 country. The truth, Prime Minister, is that you have run out of our money. The country as a whole is now in negative equity. Every British child is born owing around £20,000. Servicing the interest on that debt is going to cost more than educating the child. Now, once again today you try to spread the blame around. You spoke about an international recession, international crisis. Well, it is true that we are all sailing together into the squalls, but not every vessel in the convoy is in the same dilapidated condition. Other ships used the good years to caulk their hulls and clear their rigging, in other words, to pay off debt. But you used the good years to raise borrowing yet further. As a consequence, under your captaincy, our hull is pressed deep into the waterline under the accumulated weight of your debt. We are now running a deficit that touches 10% of GDP, an almost unbelievable figure. More than Pakistan, more than Hungary, countries where the IMF has already been called in. Now, it's not that you're not apologising. Like everyone else, I've long accepted that you're pathologically incapable of accepting responsibility for these things. It's that you're carrying on, wilfully worsening our situation, wantonly spending what little we have left. Last year, in the last 12 months, 100,000 private sector jobs have been lost, and yet you created 30,000 public sector jobs. Prime Minister, you cannot carry on forever squeezing the productive bit of the economy in order to fund an unprecedented engorgement of the unproductive bit. You cannot spend your way out of recession or borrow your way out of debt. And when you repeat in that wooden and perfunctory way that our situation is better than others, that we are well placed to weather the storm, I have to tell you, you sound like a Brezhnev-era apparatchik giving the party line. You know, and we know, and you know that we know that it's nonsense. Everyone knows that Britain is worse off than any other country as we go into these hard times. The IMF has said so. The European Commission has said so. The markets have said so, which is why our currency has devalued by 30%, and soon the voters too will get their chance to say so. They can see what the markets have already seen, that you are the devalued Prime Minister of a devalued government.
Well, I love that speech. And again, most of those speeches, political speeches, seem so contrived and gone through focus groups. That seems so genuine. Stop it! Stop what you're doing. You're enslaving our children and grandchildren. You're hurting us. You're hurting the economy. Stop doing what you're doing. Stop exchanging borrowing for budgeting. Well, I said there were two things we need to not exchange. The second one is don't exchange liberty for security. You know, whenever you're in a crisis, personal crisis, a national crisis, there's a tendency to say, I'm willing to give up some of my liberty if somebody will help me out. Every time somebody offers, especially a government, offers to help you out, the same time they hand you one thing, they take several others. And so whenever there's a crisis, even with FDR's time, it was crisis. Somebody's got to do something. Well, the problem is the somebody that does something is also a wicked, sinful person. And they hand you one thing while taking another. Well, does the Bible speak to this at all? Well, it actually does. There was a crisis in the nation of Israel. And they said, we need some help. We got Philistines trying to attack us. We got things coming on. And God says, trust me. Trust me to be your king. Trust me to give you liberty. Trust me to give you wisdom. I will make you prosperous. I will give you the ability to prosper so you can be generous to other nations, a light amongst the darkness. He said, well, what other options are there? Well, let's go with that one, shouldn't we? No, let's go with something else. So they turn to Samuel and they say, Samuel, we want a king. We want a king. The other nations have a king. Why can't we have a king? He says, let God be your king. No, we like the prestige of having a king and sort of people dancing around and having a big king ceremony. Can we do that? So Samuel says, I'll talk to God. And here's what they said. They said, make us a king to judge us, all the nations. And the Lord said to Samuel, Samuel, you shall solemnly forewarn them. Show them the behavior of a king who's going to reign over them. Let me tell you what happens. I don't think it means what you think it means. I don't think you want what you think you want. Let me tell you what a king will do. Now keep in mind at this point, there's no government or king in place. So, there's no government or king. So Samuel says, here's what will happen if you have a government. Remember, governments have no money. The king didn't even exist yet. Since governments have no money, they can only borrow in three ways. They either tax the producers. Who are the producers? Now today we think, well, taxing the rich. The producers were the poor, the farmers, the middle class. And God's saying, you don't want a king because the king will take from your produce. He will take from what you produce. He will tax it. And what used to be yours, property rights, will now become his. Look how many times he says it in the verse. Samuel said, he will take. What's he going to take? Your sons and daughters. He will point them to his chariots and to his horsemen. He will set some to plow his ground. What do you mean my ground? Where did he get the ground? He got it from you. Where did he get the sons? He got it from you. To reap his harvest. Well, he didn't need a harvest before. No, he didn't need a harvest before, but you start a king. Now he needs to consume your goods. He's going to take them and he's going to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. Well, he didn't have any chariots before. See, he's going to consume. He's going to take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He's going to take the best of your fields. Your fields are now going to be his fields. Your vineyards will now be his vineyards. And he's going to give them to his servants. What God's saying is, you're about to form a giant consuming mechanism called the king government. And whether it's kings or pharaohs, governments consume and take from the producers. So he gives this whole warning and he says, let me go on. He's going to take a tenth of your grain, your vintage. He's going to give it to his officers, his servants. He's going to take your finest young men, your donkeys. He's going to put them to work. He's going to take a tenth of your sheep. That's a lot of tenths. A tenth, a tenth, a tenth, a tenth. And then he says, and you will be his servants. You'll be enslaved to him. Now it may sound like, look at all the security. Look at all the way he's providing for me. Look at the way the king's going to take care of us. But whatever he offers in security, he will take away your liberty. He will take away your prosperity. And he will take away your generosity. So Samuel finishes this speech, probably felt like, wow, I did a good job. That sounds like good wisdom. People are going to listen to me. And he says, so, are we going to listen to God who says, don't get enslaved to a king? Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, no, we will have a king over us. Sounds like my 5-year-old. No, I don't care what you say. I want a king. I want that security. God says, you don't. You do not want that in your life. You don't want to take that path. You don't want to go down that road. And all through history, Christ followers have come and said, we want limited government. You know why? You know why we diversified power in the Constitution? Because we know at the heart of each person is sinfulness. And whenever you put one person in power, they find a way to manipulate the system to take from the producers, the farmers, the poor, the middle class, the rich. They take from them to consume for themselves. What happens when you take from a business? When you take more of their income in this direction, they have less money to save, which is less money to produce jobs. The more you tax them, the more you punish the business industry. And the more this entity consumes, the more this can't operate. But throughout the Old Testament, there's a tension. And the tension is, we want a king. Why can't there be a good king? A king who makes us more free. And you see all through the prophets and the judges, they try it, and this one doesn't work, and this one doesn't work, and this one doesn't work. Where is the king? We need a different kind of king, a liberating king, a king that we can surrender fully to that makes us more free, not less. Yet they give themselves to king after king after king. And they lose more and more of their liberty, more and more of their prosperity, more and more of their generosity. And Jesus shows up. And Jesus comes, and he's not like a king they've seen before. He doesn't come on a giant stallion. He comes riding on a donkey. He says, I am the humble king. I am the king that comes, instead of sacrificing my servants for myself, I'm going to sacrifice myself for my servants. I'm the type of king that comes and gives my life to rescue you. If you will surrender to me, if you will put me as the king of your heart and control of your life, if you allow me to control your decision making, not just your eternal destiny, I want you to trust me to be king of that, but even the king of your financial decisions, if you will make me your king, you will be freer, internally and externally. You will have more prosperity. You know, the friends of mine I know who practice Godonomics, who give a percentage of their income, who save a percentage of their income, they're not poorer. They're richer. They're richer because they followed the wise advice and wisdom of God. For God loves you and I, and he wants us to experience the abundant life by putting Jesus as king of our hearts. What would God say to FDR? Same thing he'd say to you and I. Stop spending tomorrow's money today. In session 4, we're going to look at what would God say to Alan Greenspan and the Fed in session 4.